This computer. Okay, so today is all about we're gonna learn how to start the actual physical design process. Once you have put together a morphological chart, then the idea is to go through and choose all the best options from your morphological chart and and put together what you think is the best design, right? So if for example, if you had this morphological chart for a chair and you have your list of requirements in front of you and you have your all of the stuff you've done in front of you, you should be able to look at this morphological chart and say, according to what I have learned my uh, from my research and from my client and everything else, uh, I'm going to give this first option in the seat category a 9 out of 10. This one a 7 out of 10, 3 out of 10, whatever. You're going to score these based on how well they fit the requirements, how well they fit together with other things, and then you could do the same thing with the backs options and the armrest options and the stand options and so on. And then you'll essentially go through here and pick all the best ones and put those together as your design. That's going to be how you're going to build your design. Some of these objects will be things that you will buy that are already available. Some of these objects are things you're going to have to actually build. Some of them you're going to have custom designed and made by another company or whatever. But whatever the point is, whatever the case is, you're going to choose the best options for each of the components, and then you're going to start to put together a design digitally to see how the overall product is going to look, how it's all going to fit together, to check to see if there's any mistakes you made in your thoughts process and everything else. And then you can easily either start digitally testing it, or you can use that three-dimensional digital design as your blueprints to build it in the real world and test it in the real world. So digital, testing with a computer or simulating a test is something that is more advanced than this class. We don't have time to learn how to put together what is something that can actually be used to test your ideas, a simulation test. So you will all make physical prototypes. But we're still going to do the three-dimensional design process, and that's what this week is all about. So from your morphological chart, you figure out the best design. Sometimes people will figure out their best 2 or 3 designs, because sometimes the scores are just too close. Sometimes you'll have 2 different pathways through this that are very close in design features, in like meeting all the design requirements. And so you maybe try out 2 or 3 of them, but usually no more than 3. And oftentimes it ends up just being one. There's one that is the absolute best, and everything else kind of pales in comparison. So that's where you and again you rank these things based on the customer requirements, any research you've done, and your research that you've done can include, the cost, the profit, the ease of assembly, the longevity, the power usage. It can be based on the compatibility with other components. It can also be based on ergonomics, ease of use, ease of user interface, between the user and the object or whatever it is you're designing. All the things that you've thought of while you're going through this process that you think might be important for your particular project are all things that you take into consideration when you give each one of these options a score or a grade, and then you go through and pick the highest scoring combinations. Okay, so anyway, once you've done that, that's where you go on to actual digital design, and that's what we're doing this week. We're going to be using a very simple, straightforward design program because most of you have probably not done three-dimensional design. I know that some of you have, but most people haven't. And so this one is probably the easiest one to learn. You can just go online and you can search either for SketchUp or Trimble. Trimble is the company that makes this program, and it's just trimble.com. I'm not even sure if they call it SketchUp anymore. They probably do. But you can go up, so you can get Trimble in two different versions essentially. One version is a free online version, and the other one is a one that you download to your computer and is much more involved. And I don't, let's see, this website has changed a lot since last year when was the last time I looked at it. As a student, I think that you can get a month free of their full version if you want to download it to your computer. If you don't want to mess with that, the online version is usually sufficient. Although the online version at one point didn't allow you access to their part library or their online library of parts that are already created by other people, and that might be worth downloading the original version, the big version. Okay, so apparently they have separate solutions now for different industries, so that's good to know. So if you're doing agricultural, construction, geospatial, government, infrastructural, natural, transportation, utilities, it's all different. What's Dimensions 2022? Plus user, oh, that's a conference, okay. So anyway, we go down over here to solutions. You can choose which industry you're using it, and then you can choose technologies here. So analytics, autonomy, connectivity, modeling, and positioning. We're actually looking at modeling, and man, they just don't make this simple anymore. There's just all kinds of things to click through. Used to be you just clicked on it and started using it. Explore agriculture, geospatial. You know what? I'm getting out of here. I'm going to I'm going to see if I search for SketchUp if it gives me something different, and because it seems like Trimble has become a much bigger company than the last time I checked. They've started going into many more things. But if I just go to SketchUp with Google, it hopefully will bring up something simpler. Yeah. So SketchUp has its own site now that is probably an offshoot from Trimble's website. Yeah, so this is much easier. There we go. All right, so going to just go to this button here and just try SketchUp, and here they're opening it up at the professional projects, free 30-day trial. Don't need a credit card, so you can go ahead and do that if you want. You can go to personal projects, and you can use SketchUp free online. They do allow you 10 gigabytes of cloud storage, which is nice. But the 30-day trial gives you access to pre-built models, which is something you probably want. Let's see what higher education gives you. Yeah, that might be a better option. But anyway, you're going to download one of these options and you can start using it. It's pretty easy, drag and drop and pull and slide your mouse around and push, point and click and all these stuff. It's pretty straightforward. And the way that you're going to learn it is, I think the best way to learn this stuff is to just do it from step one. And that's the way I learned it. Essentially, I sat in a lab at a computer while somebody was doing things on a big screen, and I was doing exactly what they were doing. And that's what I want you to do. So in the homework, there's this thing called, at the very end of the engineering design product, there's project digital design and project CAD intro. So I think we're going to do the project CAD intro first, which is due today apparently, but I'm going to change that. So the project CAD intro, when we open this up, it has two things. Open your SketchUp file for video 1 and upload your SketchUp file for video 2. If we click on video 1, it takes up to SketchUp Free for Beginners Part 1, which is a YouTube video. And we're going to go ahead and watch this today in class together. And I'm going to stop it at various times to answer questions that anybody has, but I'm also going to stop it at various times to make my own comments about digital design in general. So there are many, many, many videos on how to do things in Google SketchUp. If you're wondering if something can be done or how to do something, just search on on YouTube's website for whatever it is you're trying to do. If you're trying to make a window in SketchUp, there's 100 million videos for that. If you're trying to design or download something from the warehouse, they have a 3D warehouse of just millions and millions of 3D models you can use. If you're trying to figure out how to make a part in Google SketchUp, there's ways I mean, everything that you can imagine has been done before on Google SketchUp, and a few things you've never imagined can be done on Google SketchUp, and they've recorded a video on how to do it. So we're just going to go ahead without further ado, just get started on this. You can jump into Google. You can jump into SketchUp right now and start following along, doing the things that they're doing, because the thing that you're going to turn in My Open Math is a file, a SketchUp file that has everything that they did. So it's essentially going to be this. It's going to be a file of all the different little things that they do in this video. And you can get started on that now, or you can go home and watch the video on your own and make your file later. It's totally up to you. So does anybody need more time to download or to get started on Google SketchUp? Should be able to just jump into it pretty quickly with the free version, with the online version. All right. So if we're ready to go, we're ready to go. If you have any questions that you want to ask while we're watching this video, please just raise your hand, speak out, yell or something, and we will address those questions. If I know the answer, I'll answer it. If I don't, we'll look for the answer.
What's up, guys? Justin here with the SketchUpEssentials.com, back with the SketchUp free tutorial for you. So in today's video, we're going to go through an introduction of the online free version of SketchUp and kind of how that works. This is kind of going to be a beginner level tutorial for getting started with the app. So I've gotten a lot of questions about doing a tutorial on this version. So let's go ahead and just jump into it. All right, so in this video, we're going to go through and we're going to kind of get started with the online version of SketchUp. So this is the free version of SketchUp that is now web-based. And so you can access that by going to app.sketchup.com, or if you just go to sketchup.com and go to the free version, you can also access this that way. And so if you're accessing this page for the first time, this will give you kind of a getting started page or a getting started view for this that'll walk you through everything in the free version. Since I've already gone through that, it sees that and it doesn't walk me through that, but I think there's a start tour button you can click in order to get kind of a tour of the way that everything works and where everything's located. So I will also walk you through that. So the first area is the home bar up at the top, and this is where you can access your model preferences. You can save projects up here. So this is kind of where you're going to save things and also access. If you want to upload to the 3D warehouse or something like that, you can do that here as well. So this is where you're going to name your model, and you're also going to be able to save it up here. And then on the left-hand side of the page, you've got a toolbar on the left-hand side. These are going to be your toolbars for the tools that you're going to use to draw things inside of SketchUp. So this is where you're going to access the things that you're actually going to use to draw inside of your model. So you can access things like your line tools and your eraser tools. So these are your actual drawing tools.
Now I'm going to stop right here just for a second. When you stop this video, you're going to see a bunch of other free videos on how to do other things, more advanced things. If you have interest in that, you can go and learn more, or if you need it for your project, you can go and learn there. But also, I want to point out some things that are similar in other three-dimensional drawing programs or three-dimensional drafting programs. Most three-dimensional drafting programs now have these toolbars available somewhere on the screen all the time. It didn't used to be the case. When I was studying engineering, it was a very different, you wouldn't even recognize it as a drawing program because it was so non-user friendly. It was all written for use with Unix, and the paradigm was super just weird and was hard to understand because it was not point and click, had almost nothing to do with a mouse. You used a mouse almost not at all. And nowadays it's very much point and click, very much tools in front of you. Most of the professional drawing programs are not a light background, but some of them have become that way recently, just because that's what people are used to. Most of the drawing tools have traditionally been black backgrounds because it's actually better for your eyes, and also because old screens were black and had colored things on them. But it is better on your eyes, and so most of the professional ones still do that because these people stay in front of these screens for hours and hours and hours at a time. Most of them also don't have a person standing there on the screen. That's pretty unique to SketchUp. And you can actually just highlight that person and delete them, which is what most people do. And in the pro version of it, I don't think they have the person sitting there anymore. This is more for the beginners. But that's just an overview of how SketchUp is similar and how it is different. Also, many of the programs don't have this origin set up here with the different dimensions showing right in the middle of the screen. This is fairly unique to SketchUp, although some of them have adopted something similar to that. This SketchUp is trying to give people a real feeling of three-dimensionality as they look at the screen for the first time, whereas other programs don't kind of cater to that need. They just assume that you can think in 3 dimensions, which honestly is a very difficult thing to do. Being able to think in 3 dimensions through a screen is quite challenging. And you will find yourself designing something that you think is one way, and then as you rotate it to look at another way, you'll find it's all screwed up because you just did something that you didn't know that you'd done in 3 dimensions. So anyway, back to the video. Unless there are any questions before we start again. Yes.
Since I won't be doing any 3D modeling, can I use a CAD that lets you plan electrical circuits?
You can. You can. Yeah.
Tinkercad is also free and lets you. It also has a lot of Arduino components and already incorporated in the system.
This does as well.
The Wi-Fi module is inside of Tinkercad as well. So
yeah, this one also has those, but it doesn't. I don't know if this one does circuitry. So I don't know if you're going to do any circuit board designing, but this one also has that. But if you're familiar with Tinkercad, I don't care. Whatever it is you want to use, you can use it. So anybody wants to pay $200,000 and go out and get Creo, then you can use that too. So, anyway. All right.
Over here on the left-hand side. Note that if you click on this and there's a little arrow next to it, a lot of these have multiple tools contained inside of this toolbar, so you can single click on this and then click on one of those tools to activate that particular tool if that's what you want to do. So you can use this to get to all of those different tools just by clicking on these. And so on the right-hand side, you've got your panels. Your panels are going to give you more information about like your selected objects inside of SketchUp. So like, for example, if I select this model, you can see how you get the entity info for that model. That's also where you're going to be able to access the outliner, which you have to upgrade in order to use that function. But you're also going to be able to access information about your components and your materials and things like that. And you can open and close these just by clicking on the icons and then coming in here and clicking on this X right here if you want to close something that you've opened over here. You can also kind of make this panel go away by clicking on the close panel option right here. In the lower left-hand corner, this is going to be your status bar. So this is going to give you the ability to undo and redo. It's going to give you access to help files. You're also going to get information over here about whatever your active tool is. So like right now, I have the select tool active, and so it's telling me that with your current tool active, you select objects. And then it gives you information about about all the different things you can do with those tools. So like if I was to tap the L key to go into the line tool, you can see how this gives me instructions on how to draw a line using the line tool. So if you're ever using a tool inside of SketchUp and you get stuck and you don't know how to use it, you may want to take a look at the status bar right here, because that'll give you some instruction on what to do with it. And then finally, on the lower right-hand side of your page, you have your measurements box. And so that's going to have information about the different dimensions and things associated with the tools that you have active. So for example, if I was to come in here and draw a line, you can see how as I move my mouse, the value in that box is changing depending on where my mouse is. So this is going to give you information about the length of things inside of your model.
I'm going to back that
So
up just
in
a little bit
addition,
because you couldn't
it's
really
going to have
see.
information about the different dimensions and things associated with the tools. Using a tool inside of SketchUp and you get stuck and you don't know how to use it, you may want to take a look at the status bar right here, because that'll give you some instruction on what to do with it. And then finally, on the lower right-hand side of your page, you have your measurements box. And so that's going to have information about the different dimensions and things associated with the tools that you have active. So for example, if I was to come in here and draw a line, you can see how as I move my mouse, the value in that box is changing depending on where my mouse is. So this is going to give you information about the length of things inside of your model. So in addition, you can also type values into this box, and you don't need to click in the box in order to do this. Just whenever you have a tool active, and like for example, if I set my first point with the line tool, you can just type in a length. So let's say I wanted this to be 5 feet long. You can see how I can type in a value of 5 feet, and that's going to show up in my measurements box. So if I hit the enter key, you can see how that draws a line that's 5 feet long. So that's going to give you information about the active tool and the measurements of whatever you're doing. And so before we get started drawing, let's talk just a bit about navigating around inside of your workspace. And your workspace is going to be the area where you're actually going to do your work inside of SketchUp. And so you can see how inside of this space, this is a 3D space that you can navigate around. And there's really two ways to do that. The first is just to come over here and click on either these first person tools or the orbit tool right here. And you can see how there's multiple tools in here for adjusting your view and flying around with your camera in order to get to wherever you want to go inside the 3D model. For example, the first tool, and the tool you're probably going to use the most, is called the orbit tool. And so you can access that by clicking on this button right here and clicking on the orbit tool. You can see how when you do that, you can then click and drag your left mouse button in order to fly around and orbit around. And so you can also pan by clicking on the little hand. That's going to allow you to drag your view left or right. You can also zoom in by clicking on the zoom button and then clicking on dragging and moving your mouse up and down. And then there's a couple other tools in here as well. This zoom window is going to allow you to drag a box around whatever you want to zoom in on. And then zoom extents is going to zoom your camera model out so that everything inside of your model is going to be inside of your camera view. So you can use this toolbar right here to navigate around. I actually do not recommend this because there's a better way to do that. And the better way to do that is if you have a 3-button mouse with a scroll wheel, which is going to be really important if you're going to be using SketchUp a lot. You're really going to want to have that 3-button mouse. What you can do instead is you can click and hold your center mouse button in order to orbit. And so what I'm doing is I'm clicking and holding that scroll wheel down. So I'm clicking it like a button, not rolling it and holding that. So that allows me to orbit. And then in addition, if I click and hold that button down and I hold the shift key on my keyboard and move my mouse, you can see how this allows me to pan my view around really easily. So by holding that center mouse button and holding the shift key around, you can pan.
Another thing that you should know is that people who are really good at doing this stuff get really good at all these shortcuts, and it becomes just second nature to them. It becomes second nature by practicing them. And there are different ways to practice this. There are actually tutorials on YouTube where they will give you exercises to do to help you to learn them, help you to practice them. You call it practicing multi-gesture or or keyboard shortcuts or something like that for SketchUp. and you can practice those things and learn how to use them really well. Another thing that you can do with all of these things is they can be customized. I think that if you download the full version of SketchUp, you can customize it to however you want it. If you're used to using keyboard and mouse together to do different shortcuts, you can customize that to something that works better for you. Some computer-aided designers will actually have a mouse with like 17 buttons on it, so some crazy number of buttons all around the mouse and all different kinds of roller wheels and everything else. And each one of those things they've customized to do a very specific thing, so that they can have a very tactile experience, and they use the shortcut keys and everything else. It's you want to you have other tools. For example, this mouse here, which is made by Apple, has touch every direction on it essentially. So it can scroll in every direction with just your finger on it, which is very useful, because then you can navigate around this thing just by holding it down and sliding your finger around. You can get to things very quickly. There's upsides and downsides to every way that you do something in something like this. It really depends on what your preferences are, what is most comfortable to you. Most people that I've worked with that are very good at this kind of stuff just really get to know really well the features that are built in already into the program without customizing anything. And then they stick with that program pretty much for the rest of their life. That's how most people do it. But I have met some that are extremely good who have just customized it so it works just for their brain. And that's just something you should know. Those shortcuts are extremely, make your work go extremely fast and makes it much easier. So you might as well start learning them right away and start using them right away, get used to them.
And then the other thing that's really powerful about this is you can roll the mouse button up and down in order to zoom in and out. So I'm scrolling up with my center mouse button by rolling the wheel up, and I can zoom out by rolling the wheel down. And so that's really going to be the fastest way to move.
So something really important about that particular feature, which is one that I use a lot, I probably use the scroll up and down. So on my mouse, it's just I slide my finger up and down on the mouse, forward and backward on the mouse. For a standard mouse, it's you're rolling on that wheel forward and backward. On a trackpad, it's it push down the left button and slide a finger, or left button and slide a finger. But you need to figure that out if you're using a trackpad. Trackpads are not generally very good for this. They're cumbersome. But I use that one a lot, zooming in and out. And when you're zooming in and out, it matters where your cursor is. It matters where your arrow is, because that's what it's going to zoom on. So if you've put it right on the center of this model's skirt here, it's going to zoom right where that mouse is. But if you put it on her right between her eyes, it's going to zoom in on her face. If you put it on her right shoe, it's going to zoom in on her right shoe, and so on. So that essentially where you put your mouse determines how the zoom goes, right? And that's a very useful tool. Also, with the orbit, wherever you click the button with the orbit tool, it will orbit around that point. So if you're trying to orbit around a model, you need to put it somewhere near the model. And as you get better at it, you'll realize that putting it at the corner of the model creates a very different orbit than putting it at the center of the model. So very different things that you can do with all of those things.
Move around in your model, you can see I can move around really quickly by quickly toggling between the zoom by rolling my mouse wheel up and down, clicking and holding that in order to orbit, and then clicking and holding the center mouse button and holding the shift key in order to pan. You can see how that allows me to move around this model really quickly. So there's also some first-person tools in here that I don't really want to get into in this video. There are some other navigation tools, but we don't really need to talk about those right now. And so now that we've gone through and talked about navigation and your toolbars and everything else, now let's talk about drawing inside of SketchUp. And so drawing is fairly simple. You just activate a tool by either clicking on it or typing in a keyboard shortcut, and I usually recommend you use keyboard shortcuts because they're a lot faster. But you just activate a tool by clicking on it, And then you just follow the instructions. So in this case, this says to select my start point to draw a line. So if I activate my line tool, you can single click, move your mouse, and then click again to set the end point. And so you can see how this draws a line between those 2 points that I dictate. And one thing that's really important for you to learn from the beginning is don't click and drag when you're doing this, because what that does is that removes the ability for you to type in measurements and to do this precisely. So you can see how by clicking on this line, let's say that we wanted to draw a line that was 5 feet long or 10 feet long. Let's go with 10 feet. So what we would do is we would single click to set our start point. We would move our mouse in the direction that we want to draw, and then we would type in a value of 10 feet and hit the enter key. And so that's why it's really important that you don't click and drag to draw your line. It's important that you single click, move.
And what he means by click and drag is don't hold down your button while you're drawing your line. SketchUp is set up with a default that if you just click once, it activates the line drawing tool or whatever tool that you're drawing with. It activates it, and then all you have to do is move your mouse. You don't have to hold the button down while you're moving the mouse. If you do hold the button down while you're moving the mouse, it will still work, but it will not allow you to type in a length. So then you have to get the length exactly right, which turns out to be a pain in the neck when you're dragging around with your finger on the mouse. It's just, you end up being off by a 16th or a 32nd of an inch or whatever. Which brings up another thing. You can choose your units when you open a new project, and you should choose units that you're going to use. You know, you might think, oh, I'm going to use metric units because we're doing something scientific, but you're not going to measure things in metric. We're in America. Now, if you're off in Argentina, like where Juan is from, that would be different. You might choose meters because that's what you're used to measuring, and that's what your tape measures are in. So anyway, you choose your units to match what you'll actually use in the real world, because then you don't have to convert later.
Move your mouse and then click again or type in a value. Because if I click and drag like this, I'm holding the mouse button down right here. And let's say I wanted this to be a 15-foot 4-inch line or something like that. You can see I can kind of move my mouse to try to get on that 15-foot 4-inch length, but I can't really get there. And then I can't type in a value because if I let up on my mouse button in order to type in that value, it just draws the line. But on the other hand, if you activate the line tool by tapping the L key, you single click, and then you move your mouse in this direction, note that now I can type in a value of 15-foot 4 inches and hit the enter key. So as long as you don't click and drag, you can type in values for what you want your tool, for the dimension that you want your tool to draw things in. And so it's fairly simple to draw lines inside of SketchUp, but now I want to talk a little bit about creating faces. And so a face is something inside of SketchUp.
I want to mention something else that he hasn't mentioned yet, but that I would mention right away. You notice that each one of these lines that he's drawn, they don't look parallel to each other, but they are parallel to each other. And the reason I know they're parallel is because whenever you draw a line that is parallel to one of your axes, it will highlight in the color of that axis. And each time he's drawn one of these lines, he's adjusted it until it was green. And when they're green, they're parallel to the axis of that color. When they snap to that color. Normally, I don't remember what color they are normally, purple or something like this, pinkish purple. But they'll, like, if you drew one that was going downward from this lady model to the right bottom corner of the screen, and if you adjusted it just right, it would highlight red eventually. So that would be parallel to the red. And then if you put it standing up next to this lady over here, you'd get blue eventually if you moved it around and lined it up so it was parallel. So when it is parallel, it does that snapping to the color of the axis. And that's the same for it's used for line tools. It's the same if you use a rectangular tool. If you get one of the edges of the rectangle parallel to it, it will highlight the edges of the rectangle that are parallel. It even works for circle tools, but it works for circle tools differently. When the face of the circle is pointing in the same direction as when a perpendicular line when the face of the circle is perpendicular to one of the axes, then it lights up with that color. That's like, I guess, the best way to say it. So if we drew a circle in this plane and it was perpendicular to the blue axis because it's in the plane of the red and green axis, then it would actually light up blue. So those are nice little tools that tell you when you're in a particular plane or when you're going in a particular direction. In 3 dimensions, it's often hard to tell which things are facing on a 2-dimensional screen. So you have to rely on other things like these highlight tools and such to figure that out.
Where SketchUp actually fills in the space between lines. So like, for example, if I was to draw a line this way, like this, and then like this, what you're going to notice is you get this filled in face inside of this triangle. Well, the reason for that is because SketchUp is what's known as a face modeler. And what that means is SketchUp draws faces anytime you have 3 or more coplanar edges inside of your model. And so coplanar means that all of these edges are on the same plane. So like, for example, if I was to come in here and I was to draw a line like this along the green axis, and we'll talk about the axes in a second, and then draw an edge up like this, and then draw another edge like this one down here, and then close this in, you can see how SketchUp doesn't actually fill in a face, because even though I have 4 edges in here, they're not on the same plane, meaning this edge and this edge are on the blue plane or the flat plane, and this edge are on the red plane, which is a vertical plane. But you can see how SketchUp isn't filling in a face because this doesn't have 3 or more coplanar edges. However, if you were to come in here and draw a line from here to here, you can see how SketchUp actually fills a face in both vertically and horizontally, because now you have 1, 2, 3 coplanar edges here. You have 1, 2, 3 coplanar edges here. And so that works for multiple different edges. So like, for example, if we were to draw like a rectangle all on the same plane, you can see how SketchUp would fill that in because all those edges are on that plane. And so now let's talk a little bit about healing faces and deleting edges and things like that. Because what you could do in this situation is, if you wanted to, you can select both the face or any of these edges just by clicking on them. Well, if you were to come in here and you were to delete out this edge by selecting it and then hitting the delete key, you can see how there's no longer a face inside of the shape because it now doesn't have 3 or more closed coplanar edges. You can see how these edges are all coplanar, but it's not actually closed in. And so if we wanted to get that face back, all we would have to do is just redraw across this edge. So you can see how I just drew a line from here to here, and that allowed me to heal this face inside of SketchUp. And so another thing to note is sometimes a face like this one, you can actually select it, and you can see how this is indicating that it's selected because you get all of these little dots in here. Usually things turn kind of a bluish color when they're selected inside of SketchUp. Well, let's say this face got selected, then you hit the delete key to delete that face out. Well, if you wanted to heal that face back in, what you could do is you could just trace over one of these edges with the line tool, and you can see how this fills this back in whenever we draw that edge. And so now I want to talk just a bit about these different colors that are showing up when we have tools active. So let's say, for example, that we activate the line tool by tapping the L key again. And you can see how if I start moving my mouse over different edges, I start getting these little different shapes and colors, and dotted lines start showing up, and all those different things. Well, what those are is those are a part of SketchUp's inference engine. And SketchUp's inference engine is where SketchUp tries to figure out where you want to draw different things. So it kind of guesses where you want to draw, and it also gives you little tips. So like, for example, if I activate this line tool and move my mouse over this line, you can see how this blue circle indicates that this is the midpoint of that line, meaning I can find the middle of this edge, and I can draw off of that by clicking on that point where that midpoint is. So that's one way that you can do that. There's different inferences that you get by hovering over edges. So like, for example, if I hover over this edge with the line tool active and then I move my mouse, you can see how I get a dotted line coming off of that end. That's kind of indicating that if I was to draw a line from this point, it would be level with the point that I had kind of moused over. And so we can talk more about those in the future, but those give you kind of an idea of what you're drawing along. And the most important one that you need to be aware of is when you have a tool active like the line tool, you need to be most aware of the ones that are indicating that you're drawing along a certain axis. And the reason for that is whenever you're drawing inside of SketchUp, you want to make sure you're drawing along an axis so that you can be sure things are coplanar. So you can see how as I move my mouse, if I move my mouse here, it tells me I'm drawing this on the red axis. But if I move my mouse here, it's telling me I'm drawing on the blue axis, which would be more of a vertical line. And so what you need to do is you need to make sure when you're drawing something like this rectangle that you're drawing along these red and green axes, just to make sure that everything's coplanar. Because if you don't, what happens is you come in here and you start drawing, and you draw a little edge right here, like up like this, and then you accidentally draw a line from this edge to this edge and from this edge to this edge. And you can see how even though this looks like a full-on rectangle, because this line wasn't actually drawn along the green axis or the red axis, you can see how you can't really close this in because all of your edges aren't coplanar. So if you're not modeling along the axes when you're doing this, you start running into big problems, kind of like this one. And so one thing that you can do in order to make sure that you're drawing along those different axes is when you activate a tool, and like for example with the line tool, if I set my first point, if you tap either the left arrow key, the right arrow key, or the up arrow key, this will actually lock your different tools to the different axes. So let's do another example. If we activate the rectangle tool by tapping the R key, you can see how I can tap my left, right, or up arrow keys in order to dictate if I'm going to draw a line, or if I'm going to draw a rectangle along the green, if I'm going to draw a rectangle along the red, or if I'm going to draw a rectangle along the blue. So you can see how by tapping those arrow keys with those tools active, you can see how by tapping those arrow keys with those tools active, you can force this to draw along whatever axis you want this to draw along. And so in the remaining time, I want to talk about going to 3D inside of SketchUp. And so let's say, for example, that I have this rectangle right here, and I want this to become like it's not a cube, but more of a 3D rectangle. So you can see how what I'm doing is I'm coming in here and I'm drawing out all of these different edges. And by the way, to lock to an inference, you can hold the shift key in order to lock that along whatever your inference is. So you can see how as I hold the shift key down at this tool active, whatever axis inference I have active, you can see how that's locking in. So now I can draw a line that lines up with like one of these edges or something like that just by holding that shift key. But you can see how if I come in here and I draw in all of these different faces, you can see how I can make a 3D shape like a box by manually drawing in all of these edges. The problem is that's really time consuming. So you could come in here and draw everything manually if you really wanted to, or you can use a tool inside of SketchUp called the push-pull tool. And what the push-pull tool does is that takes a face like this one, and it extrudes it into 3D. So you can see how by activating that tool, either by clicking on this or tapping the P key on your keyboard, you can mouse over a face, single click, and move your mouse in order to extrude this into 3 dimensions. And so basically that's taking this face, it's moving it up, and then it's filling in the geometry around all the different edges to make this a 3D shape. So you're going to use the push-pull tool a lot in order to create different 3D things. And so not only can you use the push-pull tool to add material, you can also use it to remove material. And so let's say, for example, that I drew an arc across this edge right here. You can see how what I did is I split this face into 2 different faces. Well, now I could activate the push-pull tool, and remember how before we used this to add material. Well, if I single click on this face, and move my mouse to the back, you can see how what this does is this actually removes material. And one thing to note about this is you see how I'm getting this message that says the offset is limited. You can see how I can't push pull this back any further because this has reached the end of the shape that's back here. Well, one thing you're going to notice is if you move your mouse all the way to the back and then really anywhere along this edge right here and you click, what SketchUp's going to do is it's going to automatically delete out this material that was left over because it's using its inferencing engine to figure out that you've removed the material all the way along an object, and it needs to delete out this flat plane right here. But this works for curved edges. This also works if you were just to draw a single edge across here. You can push pull that and then click on this back face. And then you can also cut a hole using this same method. So if I use the circle tool by tapping the C key and drawing a circle on this face, I could then activate the push pull tool, click on this face, and move my mouse until I can click on this back face right here. So you can see how I can actually push pull this further in this situation, and it's just going to add material to the back right here. Well, you don't want to do that. What you can do instead is if you rotate around to the back side using the orbit tool and you click somewhere on this back face, SketchUp is going to see that you've extruded this all the way through to the back side of an object, and it's going to automatically delete out that face. So you can see how this allows you to cut holes in objects really easily. So if I draw a rectangle along here and then use push pull, that's going to allow me to cut a rectangular shape through this object. So this is going to be one of the primary tools that you're going to use for modeling different things inside of SketchUp. And so, like for example, let's say we were to build a house or something like that. If we were to draw a wall, push pull it up, and then draw a rectangle across it, we would use the push pull tool to cut an opening for a window inside of that wall. And so that's going to be probably the primary way that you're going to create 3D geometry inside of SketchUp. So that's where I'm going to end this video. So in the next video.
All right. So he has many other videos. I want you to watch this one and the next one. And I want you to do all the stuff that he does. And then I want you to save that file and upload it. And that's your assignment for these two videos, for this homework assignment, okay? That will get you started in Google SketchUp. Eventually you can go and use the 3D, I think it's called the 3D warehouse, and start looking for parts that match the things in your morphological chart so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you put something in, but there will certainly be things that you will have to design in Google SketchUp to put into your three-dimensional design. So go ahead and get going on that. On Wednesday, we'll do some more. I will see you then.
What is the SketchUp watch the video starting this stuff?
Oh, I think it's due tomorrow. Let me take a look here. It's due today, but I'm going to put it till tomorrow.
Noise. I just the CAD that I told you about earlier doesn't have the modules I'm talking about, but there's an app called Fritzing. Fritzing that is €8. I just paid for it, and the community